Hey, hey, hey. Happy Tuesday to all of you. We're going to be talking all about boundaries today and how you can set powerful, healthy boundaries with all the stinking guilt. All right. Are you ready? Join us. Say hello. Hop in here. Let me turn my comments on so I can see y'all. And we're going to dive in. This conversation has been coming up a lot lately, just from life and in business. And so if that's you, you're in the right spot, my friends. We're going to be unpacking this, okay? So especially in the world of business, I think a lot of times we can get to a place where we get triggered with our own stuff. And if we're a people pleaser, or if you're thinking about what will people think, or maybe the person that is always in the giving mentality, this is for you. Okay. So we're going to go over a couple things today. We're going to go over, we'll look at how we can unlearn behaviors through setting boundaries. Yep. And then we're going to reveal the secrets to establishing your non-negotiables. Okay. And then finally, we're going to determine what the difference is between success and failure when it comes to boundary setting. Okay. It's a key element that I want to make sure that you stay to the end to hear that. Okay. So as we start to unpack this, I will be honest, like this again goes back to some of our previous programming and what messages we've had around boundary setting. A lot of times people see boundary setting as a negative thing. It's telling people no, right? And I'm gonna share with you that it can be a different way. It can. I noticed for myself. I'm gonna get comfy here with all of you. I noticed it with myself that there's significant consequences by not setting boundaries. And what happens for a lot of people is that we'll get into this cycle and it feels really daunting to get out of that. In multiple conversations in this past week and a half now, boundary setting has come up in different ways and different aspects. And so one of the biggest things, and so we're talking about how we can unlearn behaviors through boundary setting, that is this. When we have, earlier I was talking to someone today about how we train people to treat ourselves. And oftentimes that behavior can be unlearned just by simply placing a boundary in place. So the first thing is getting really clear for yourself. What are your expectations? How do you want to be showing up? And especially when it comes to an entrepreneurial world, and maybe that's with staff, this can obviously be applied to your personal life as well, but getting the real clear expectations of what's happening. And even if you weren't clear, I think that's a lot of cases that I've ran into is that because there was no clear expectations, people are just doing what they want to do. And people are just getting away with a lot of things that they would normally not get away with because we don't have the boundary, right? And so, getting really clear on what that is for you and setting those clear expectations. And I'm a big believer that if you've never enforced boundaries or expectations before, have a conversation, warn people that this is coming, okay? Especially when it comes to your business, especially if it's in a staff situation. And just have that conversation, open up that communication and say, okay, you know what? I've been allowing this and I can no longer allow this because of this. And so there's going to be some changes. Here's what these new changes are going to look like. And I've gotten really clear about these expectations, and maybe even if having a collaborative conversation around those expectations, get them on board with it. It's going to be way easier for you to not only enforce, but also for them to respect and respond to accordingly. Okay. And the other piece is, giving yourself some grace, because I think oftentimes we don't know what we don't know. And then we learn and we're like, okay, now that I know this new information, we're going to change things. And just giving yourself some grace in this process. We are here to grow, learn, evolve, and giving yourself grace in the process of doing this. Okay. And so when we start unpacking this, when we start to set these boundaries, that means that behavior is going to change. Okay. It's going to be good, the bad, the ugly, because there's a little learning curve of adjusting, because how you show up is going to be different. How they show up to respond to you is going to be different. And there is going to be a time of transition when you start to set these boundaries. Okay. And this is really important to do so, because so many of us get trapped in the enabler element. And what I mean by that is that we are actually more often than not unconsciously enabling the poor behavior to begin with, or the unhealthy behavior to begin with. And what I mean by that is that because we're not saying anything, because we're not saying no, because we're not setting those expectations or following those guidelines or rules that we've established for ourselves, we're actually unconsciously telling them that it's okay. Okay. And then oftentimes we'll get into that spiral because we're like, oh, I'm so frustrated and upset by this. And it's part of this is our ownership of this. And I know that that's probably hard for some of us to hear. And I realize that it is hard for us to own when we've made mistakes. It's hard for us to own when we haven't been clear with ourselves. And how can I be clear with myself if I'm not clear with myself, right? And so just own it and come to terms with it. And if you need to fall on your sword, this is a perfect opportunity to fall on your sword and say, you know what? I made a mistake. I goofed. I got, doing this, and I didn't realize that this was lacking. And now we need to go and we need to revisit this, and we need to put this in a better element for all of us to be served by this in a better way, right? And so that is the biggest thing, is when you start to set these boundaries, it becomes easier, and you start to reinforce behavior that you do desire, right? And so when people are doing what you've asked, reward them, and rewarding them can be simply thank you. It can be words of affirmation. Every once in a while, I'll usually randomly, I'll throw in a little gift card. I go and buy $5 gift cards to different places, or these positive affirmation pop-up cards. And so I'll reward those behaviors. And so it's easier to break those bad habits, to break those bad behaviors, when you've reinforced the things that you do desire. And it can be really powerful of setting that new boundary of the new expectations, right? So no longer enabling poor behavior. Okay. And that's really powerful, right? I know that when you start to set these boundaries, there's a lot of head trash that comes up for you. And I'm going to invite you to listen to it and then just say, you know what, thank you, bless and release, right? Because here's the thing, and this is so funny that back in the day, I was in a leadership program. This has been maybe 2013, 12, 13. And I remember this conversation that we had with this law enforcement gang unit came in and talked to our class one day. And they said, all people, children especially, seek out structure and consistency. And to me, that is the boundaries, right? Those are the boundaries, because that allows us to have a sense of safety. We know what to expect, and it does create a sense of safety. And it was really interesting in this class, because they said if children do not get that, they are very susceptible, if you will, to entering into gangs, because that is what gangs provide. They provide that sense of safety. Again, it's an organized organization in the sense that it does provide that consistency and routine, right? So all of these things are really, really important. And as humans, we tend to seek that out to create safety, right? The ego wants to stay safe. The ego wants to know what to expect. And so if I want to like reframe this all for us, setting boundaries creates that sense of safety, creates that sense of support for people, not only for you, but for your staff as well. And so if you need to reframe it in a way that's like, okay, how can I get on board with this and set these and be consistent? Friends, okay? All right. So I'd love to hear from you. So drop in the messages, like when has been a time where you set a boundary and maybe you in your head thought that it was going to be something negative happen, but actually it was really successful. And you're like, wow, I can't believe that. Like that actually worked. I'd love to hear from you. So drop it in the comments of what has been one of those success win-win stories for yourself by just simply setting the boundary, even if you thought it was going to be hard. Because oftentimes when we set the boundary, and it's interesting because I had a client earlier that said, when she set the boundary with a couple of her clients, they basically said, about time, thank you. You should have done this, this long ago. You should have done it this long. And oftentimes we make it a big deal in our head when really, again, people are seeking that out and are appreciative of it. Okay. All right. So the next thing I want to go over is the secrets to establishing your non-negotiables. Okay, this is so important. And I'm going to invite you because oftentimes when we start to play with boundaries, we don't even know where to start because it's like we've never done it because maybe I've been conditioned over the years to always put other people's priorities first. And I've become this massive people pleaser. And so I want you to think about what are those things that kind of irk you? Okay, this is a pretty good indicator that there's probably a boundary violation, okay, or you're feeling like you're getting frustrated by the situation. So I want you to think about that. And the more that you become conscious of this, the faster it is. So if you need to put a piece of paper by your workspace and just think about as you go through the days, like what are those things that drive you nuts or that make you want to, what is that? I want you to write those down because oftentimes those are, again, a pretty good indicator that something is off and something needs to probably be structured around that piece. And so what I'm going to invite you to do, and if you have not done this exercise, I've done another video on here. It's been probably a hot minute about values and how to identify your own values. And if you've not done that exercise, I encourage you to do so. Make it easier on yourself. Just sit down and think, brainstorm, like what are your values that you have. And actually, I think on my website, if you go to talkingwithterry.com, you can actually grab, I believe I have a values handout over there. But narrowing it down to your top 5 values and really allow that to be a guiding principles for you in making choices and setting those boundaries for yourself. Okay. And so I'm going to invite you to look through what are those things that irk you. Is there a value that's being violated? And is that where a boundary needs to be set? Okay. And I'm going to have you write down what those non-negotiables are. And a non-negotiable means no ifs, ands, and buts, right? And so one of the non-negotiables that I've put in place for my own self is that I don't work on the weekends. I have family time, and so that's a non-negotiable for me. Not going to happen, right? And then I want you to think about those that are maybe more flexible, okay? And it doesn't mean that you're not going to, set a firm boundary, but let's say there's some flexibility. So you have your non-negotiables. No, you're not moving whatsoever. And then the ones that are a little bit more flexible, meaning maybe my intention was to leave work by 6:00 and something came up and so I am leaving at 6:15 instead, right? So they have a little bit more fluidity to them. But I want you to really identify, and the more that you can start to play with what are those non-negotiables that there's, and again, maybe your non-negotiables, no, I'm going to leave by 4:00 every day and pick up, my kid from, after school practice, right? that's your non-negotiable, right? Another non-negotiable for me is that I don't start my day until 9 o'clock. I don't have any appointments. I don't have anything until 9 o'clock, so that I can drop off my daughter at school and make sure that I have things in place, right? So again, being clear about that, and where are the ones that you can have some wiggle room with, okay? And that's really important to make sure that you write those down so that you keep on them. And here's the thing is, I don't want you to tackle, if you've not been setting boundaries with people, I don't want you to tackle all of them at once, because you're gonna be like, wait, what did I do? How did, like, this is a progressive process. And so you can sit one and practice it and play with it, because it does require us to get to the place of saying no, or pausing and allowing ourselves the moment to evaluate. So often we are conditioned to say yes, and we're yes, 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 yes. It doesn't matter. And then we look at our calendar, we talk to our spouse, our significant other, we talk to our kids, and we're like, oh, that's not going to work. And then we feel even worse by going and redoing, by just an extent allowing ourselves to pause in the moment and just let's assess it before we commit to it, right? And one of these things that I'm going to share with you is, we have an event coming up in September 23rd. Oh my God, we are in September, and called Breaking Beyond. I'm actually going to throw that in the chat here. And one of the things that we have one of the guests on there is talking about this very thing, about how she grew her company, from herself and I, like literally one suitcase to an empire. And part of that meant saying no, part of that meant setting the boundaries. And so I'd love to come and invite you to come and attend this event with us. And I'm going to give you guys a special code for everyone who's hopping on here, because I want to make sure that as many people as possible can attend this event. And it's an all-day event, and I want to, pour into you and have some powerful times with you, with our guests, to really break through some of those boundaries that are holding us back. And this could be a boundary that we need to break through, right? And being able to set those boundaries. And finally, what I want to share with you is that the difference between a success and failure in making commitments, is setting boundaries, is really committing to ourselves, fully committing to this process, fully committing to what that means. Because so often what happens is that we start to put it out there and it feels difficult. Speaking our voice and standing in our power can be challenging if we've never done it before. And what happens is, because we've like, oh my gosh, we're going to upset them, I'm going to make them mad, I'm going to blah, blah, blah. And we create these little stories in our head, is that we don't stay committed to the follow through in which it's required, because we teach people how to treat us. And if we're not being consistent, we will very quickly roll right back into being rolled over, walked over, whatever the situation is for you. And so it does require a fully committed yes to you, to speaking life into you. And what that means is being clear about those expectations and reinforcing every step of the way. And that's why I invite you to start with one and play with it. Get it under your belt. Master it. I've shared on here before is that we are always on a student path or a master path. And this is one of those times is that if you've not been practicing it, you're going to have to go into the student path for a little bit and work that muscle up, and then come over to the master path. And just start with one and commit to, like, you know what, I'm going to set the boundary of my clients are not going to call me after 8 o'clock at night. They're not going to call me in crisis, right? Because what's amazing about boundary setting, when we don't do it, we actually perpetuate the problem by always being in crisis mode. And what happens for the brain is that our brain seeks out the evidence and says, gosh, you know what? I must be blah, 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 blah. And then it just reinforces it. The other thing that I'm going to invite you to do is taking a look at what are those stories that get conjured up. For example, a client the other day was saying, she needs to be needed. And so when her clients are in crises, or when they're, using her for her, knowledge, they're calling her in crises, and because she wants to be needed and wanted and to help, they take advantage of her because there's no boundary. And so now she's spinning out of control because she's not allowing herself to commit back to herself and be really clear of where she's heading. And in a lot of times, she's not making the progress that she'd like to be making because she's putting out all these fires all over the place. And so it takes us out of our zone of genius when we're not allowing ourselves to set those boundaries for ourselves and for our business. And again, let's look at it. Let's reframe this for everyone is when we set the boundary, we're actually creating a sense of safety. We're setting the expectations. And I don't know about you, but a lot of people love clarity, right? They love to know when they show up, what's going to happen. They love that. I was interviewing someone today for a position, and she was like, had this experience where she went to a job and she had to go into the services and act like she was a client of the services so she could get the full fill of it. And she goes, it was so discombobulated and there was no structure and there was this and that. And she's like, I didn't know what to do. And then I was like, I can do this, but I can't do this because I'm being a client, not the staff member. And she's like, she was so out of wits with it, right? So people love that. They love to know what the boundaries are. Kids love that. They will always test the boundaries, right? And so just giving ourselves permission to tap into that and tune into that so that we can commit to saying yes to what means yes and letting go of the things that are no longer serving us. And that requires the commitment of ourselves to be clear with what that is. All right, my friends, I'm going to invite you to come and join us at our event September 23rd. If you're here in the Denver metro area, it's one of those events that you're not going to want to miss. FOMO is real. We're going to have an incredible time. We have lots of things in store. I have a few little surprises as well, like any event that we do. And so I'm going to have you come and join us because we're going to be unpacking not only how to have create a successful business, but also what is it that we need to do for ourselves so that we can show up, be seen, be heard, and allow ourselves to have a massive impact in this world. Because I know that if you're in your own business, that's one of the biggest reasons that you sought out to create that impact, right? And so let's do it together. I'm going to invite you to come and play in a different way this in a couple weeks. So grab the link, grab that code, and make sure that you come and join us. My friends, as always, it's such a delight to be here with all of you. Make sure that you reach out to me, comment, connect. I want to hear from you what some of your successes as well. As always, be bold, be brave, be fearless, be the magic of you. Massive love to all of you, and we'll see you next Tuesday.